1 hour. Let's see where we can get. Oh, hey, the stream is live, and I was making a dumb joke. Well, anyway, now it's actually live. Yes. Hi, everybody. Okay, so it is 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The show's an hour, but we're gonna just, waffle for like 2 minutes, so people can actually get in the door. Please sound off in the chat if you want to let us know that you're here. And this is another New Edge Sword and Sorcery story chat. We haven't had any since May. I actually should have checked before this, but it's been a few months because the publisher at the heart of it all have been completely off the map due to an adorable dog who had leg surgery and needed to recover and needed to eat all of my sleep. So between that and trying to produce a certain magazine, I didn't have the bandwidth for this, but I'm very happy to be returning to it. I was surprised today while waiting, through other tasks and what have you, how much I missed doing the story chats. It really is nice to do this thing. I realize maybe I'm doing a little bit of this, but I enjoy it. I enjoy discussing contemporary stories with as much like love and attention to detail as we so often do with classics. While I'm here, why not? I've got the little Nest badge. It will look not great on a webcam, but maybe not bad. Let's see if we can even get it in focus. This is the new challenge. We have 1 hour. If I don't get into focus, we're never having the discussion. There we go. Okay, hooray, we can have the panel discussion. Anyway, the rainbow metal pin, mine got kind of pink and gold, but they come out in unique colors, which is fun. And available for pre-order, as it were, on the pre-order site for issues 3 and 4. Anyway, that's been 2 minutes. I think we should just get into it. So yes, as I was saying informally before, but formally now, welcome back to the New Edge Sword and Sorcery magazine short story panel discussion chat. Our magazine is made with love for the classics, or so I like to say in our slogan. But we think new SNS tales deserve just as much love, attention, and thoughtful critical discussion as your Conans, your Canes, and your Corums. So roughly once a month, although it has been a minute since the last one, we do a live stream panel discussion of a contemporary sword and sorcery story. Tonight, we'll be discussing Never Threaten a Spider by Sara Century, great author name, or actual name, I don't know, from Profane Altars, which is a new slim horror-infused sword and sorcery anthology. It's dubbed a weird sword and sorcery anthology, so something we'll pick into later. Put out by Weird Pump Books, mostly a horror outfit. I found this a really great read all the way through. Usually, or for a lot of these anyway, I tend to have like a theme or something like some connection to a crowdfund or otherwise like special reason for discussing the story. Tonight, I just liked it. I just liked it, and I wanted to draw attention to it, the author, and the anthology. So hey, why not, right? Luckily, it's not just my voice you're going to hear. You're also going to hear the following 3 people who will now introduce for those who are listening later to audio only. We are joined by Kevin Beckett to start.
Hello, everyone. I used to do social media for New Edge Sword and Sorcery magazine. I've now moved on to doing a monthly newsletter called Just the Axe Man, which rounds up all sword and sorcery news over the past month and curates it for your reading pleasure.
We'll also be joined by Matt Holder, who I think has a new book.
Hello. Yeah, I am the author of Hurled, Headlong, Flaming from Spiral Tower Press, available now, as well as a teacher. And I also I write reviews for Strange Horizons occasionally, so you can find some of my stuff there.
Yeah, and finally, rounding out our circle, we have Jay Wolf, who, if you paid any attention to our most recent crowdfund, you probably know who they are, but you could be a stranger wandering in from the dark. So, Jay.
Hi, I'm Jay Wolf, editor, author, illustrator, bon vivant, most recently of Beating Hearts and Battle Axes for New Edge Sword and Sorcery Brackenbury Books. I can be found online as JX Wolf just about everywhere. And that'll about do me.
All right. So, yes, as I say, the story is called Never Threaten a Spider, written by Sara Century. Slim little thing. I didn't get a word count or anything, but it's only a few pages, which honestly, classic sword and sorcery, get in, get out. And yeah, we were actually saying before this began, because now I want to tell you like a very brief summation of what the premise is. And then I'm thinking, well, how do we pronounce the character's name? It's spelled V-I-Y. How would you do it? Vi?
I think Vi works.
Vi, I think, works. I do know there's probably an actual way to say it in either Russian or Ukrainian. But unfortunately, I didn't check before logging in here. But I'm going to go with Vi just because the character's a woman, so I kind of associate with Violet, or Vi for short.
Is it like a Russian name or Ukrainian from that neck of the woods?
Oh, that
It
could
means
be.
it
Yeah.
means spirit of evil. It's actually just going to lecture here for a moment. It's actually name of a short story from Nikolai Gogol. It was originally supposed to be adapted by Italian director Mario Bava, and it ended up not, but became the horror classic Black Sunday. It did get turned into an action movie by the Soviet Union in 1967. It was essentially a Soviet response to the success of Hammer horror and Vincent Price, Edgar Allan Poe, and all
Oh,
that.
sweet.
You can actually watch it streaming on like Tubi and Shudder, I believe, might still have it.
Holy hell, I want to watch that. Soviet era
actually,
response to Hammer films, like you got me.
oh yeah,
Now we
yeah,
have homework.
trust me, it's kind of fun. It's like the first half is quite good, and then the second half really becomes like a forerunner of Evil Dead, where the main characters are like in a circle inside a mansion being beset by demons, and just the camera work and the energy is much closer to like Sam Raimi than you would think in 1967.
Wow. Okay, so well, however that that's like we just changed the stream, go watch the movie. Yeah, alas, that is not the tale we're discussing tonight. Well, not alas, I'm quite happy to discuss this one. So yes, Never Threaten a Spider by Sara Century stars the protagonist V, who has been sent into an awful swamp to find a jewel so that, well, she can achieve her goal. I won't get too more specific than that, but classic, person trying to get rich or achieve a goal otherwise by stealing something. And we open pretty much in media res with a knife to her ribs and three strangers in silvery armor standing over her. But yeah, I don't want to just do a plot summary. And and heads up, by the way, of course, if you're listening to this, spoiler territory. We can't discuss the book without discussing the story. So beware. This is the line I'm drawing. If you don't want to know what's happening in the thing, pause now, go buy the book, read the book, come back. But yeah, starting with you, Matt, why don't we just get first responses? How did you feel after you finished the story?
I did like it. I only read this recently. I just got this a few days ago, so still kind of fresh. I mean, it has some interesting things. It sort of sets something up and it executes it. I wasn't like too sort of. There wasn't much, I guess, going on underneath, or maybe, as we talk, I might find some stuff to sort of latch onto. But, it's a person goes, creepy bog monsters, creepy spider lady, and, I mean, that seems like sort of a flippant description of the story, but also like that kind of is what's happening. There is like some hints about like a relationship in there, like tries to get some character motivation stuff going. But yeah, I don't know. I thought at some point there's like a little bunny.
Yep.
And I don't know exactly how I feel or how I want to read the bunny necessarily.
That's one of the questions I was going to throw to you guys. I'm like, what about the bunny?
I thought the bunny was going to turn into the spider, which I thought might have been, I don't know, perhaps more interesting. But I don't know. I'm interested to hear y'all's thoughts, because right now, I honestly I don't have too much. Like, there's some interesting names in here. The choice of the name Antioch is interesting. The choice of the name Atticus is interesting, just from a literary point of view. Antioch is like a big city in the Bible, and Atticus is obviously from To Kill a Mockingbird. I don't know if they mean anything or if they carry any weight, but something we can maybe talk about. So
before To Kill a Mockingbird, would Atticus have had some previous, significance? I mean, it sounds almost biblical itself, but I have no clue.
I don't know. I mostly know it from To Kill a Mockingbird. Like, if I'm sure it existed before, but I feel like that book made it like a popular name, where anyone that uses the name of Atticus is probably referencing To Kill a Mockingbird. But who knows? It's not biblical. But
okay.
It is a cool name. It does
make you think of Jimmy Stewart, yeah. So
it is a cool name. I will say that.
it does make you think of Jimmy Stewart, yeah. So
Yeah, it is a cool name. I will say that. But I don't think the
Uh,
story is about racism, so I don't, I don't know what's there.
Yeah, no, I don't. The courtroom scene. No, there was no courtroom scene. All right. Well, Jay, how did you feel upon finishing the story?
So this story for me was a really interesting, specifically because the only man that appears in the story is the dead man's bog, essentially. Um,
Yeah.
one of the things I thought was fascinating is how all of the roles that we would normally say, like, oh, of course that's a dude in a classic adventuring story, are all female characters. I thought that was fascinating. And the way that it's done, like, really just effortlessly, like like it just happens that way in a way that a lot of people would justify all male casts.
Mhm.
I thought it was fascinating because, like, the king is mentioned, some other trader she's worked with is mentioned, but they're not on page. They're mentioned in the same way that a wife might get mentioned.
Mhm,
And I
mhm.
thought that was
Yeah.
fascinating. This story is very much a classic adventure story, and it follows a very specific classic adventure template. You could take this to the Lester Dent list and tick off every single action as something that comes across in that, and it's really good in that way. It's funny that that Matt brought up the bunny, because that was definitely, that felt like a red herring, and I was really kind of fascinated with where that went. I was like, this has to be something, but what is it? And I feel like that maybe is something that isn't quite clear enough in the, like, resolution of the story, but I thought it was interesting. And the fact that it sort of deviates, it's like the one thing that really truly deviates from, like, a very strict adventure story. And I'm wondering how much of that is, like, symbolic, because we think of a rabbit for a lot of different things, including things like fertility, um, future, um, hope. So
Mhm.
I feel like all of those things are potentials. I feel like those are all things that, like, could be part of that symbolism, but I don't feel like any one of them is like, oh, that's clearly the answer. And I actually really like it that way. I like that there's, like, multiple ways you could take that. I don't like didactic one note, like, oh, this is obviously a symbol from this biblical story or whatever. Like, I
Yeah, or
hate
like the rabbit was her innocence she lost when she
yeah,
became a thief.
exactly. Like
Yeah.
like the obvious thing is my least favorite thing. But yes, it was just it was interesting to me how all of those pieces slotted together and felt very natural to me. But I actually, like, on my second reading, I was like, wait a minute, there's no dudes.
Pretty
And I
much. I mean,
loved it.
there's the king is mentioned,
Yeah,
and
the king is
the
mentioned. There's a
gender of
trader who's mentioned, and he's given
yeah.
a he pronoun, but
Oh yeah, yeah.
he's not on page.
And Vi's
The lover
partner
is
was
ambiguous,
mentioned.
but
Yeah,
it's suggested to be female.
yeah. It felt like a female coded name to me. I mean,
Yeah.
just the vibe I got. No, nothing beyond that to justify it. But
Yes, solely
yeah,
vibe.
yeah, yeah. No, totally. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I find that kind of neat, and just accepted it, enjoyed it. All right, Kevin, how did you feel when you finished the story?
One thing that I really kind of admired was the way it described Dead Man's Bog. I There's
Yes.
definitely other descriptions of swamps where it's like this rot and fungus would give this sort of like life. Here, I was really struck that she knew enough to make it seem like a bog, but also very gloomy. This is very much like a depressing place to be in.
Mhm.
I mean, there's other places where, yeah, like logs rotting and maggots coming out. There's a little bit of that, but it's not like it's really fed with life. It really seems like a really gloomy, near lifeless place.
Mhm. Sorry,
And
go
I
on.
have
I
a
don't want to
theory
cut you off.
about that, but I'll
Okay.
go in a little bit longer. Yeah.
All right, all right. Yeah, yeah, so obviously I like the story. Why would I suggest it for this discussion otherwise? I found I ripped through it, which was enjoyable. I found the whole time that there was a strong sense of place. I completely agree with you, Kevin. I really got like I felt like I was in the setting. And yet it didn't do like 7 paragraphs of description to do that, right? It just you use it to do that. It just was very evocative and thoughtful. And it got me to maybe one of the things I'm thinking about where like uh, you know, I guess I'll do a little thing here for I'm gonna reward people who are checking out the live stream. Later this week, we're gonna open to submissions for New Age Sword and Sorcery. We're actually gonna have an open submission slot for next year. Why do I mention that? Because in the submissions page, you got to write what you're looking for, what you like, what you want as an editor, obviously. And I do explicitly say in that, like, please avoid stock fantasy elements. Please avoid your dragons, your ghosts, your, and so on and so forth, your generic skeletons and so on. And yet the funny thing is, I was writing those words basically. I said, be specific, be weird. And I want to talk about weird a little bit further along. But then I went back over this and I was like, well, there's skeletons, illusory women warriors, a giant spider with illusion powers. It's all pretty classic. So shouldn't Oliver the editor not like this? Oliver the editor loves this. What's going on? And I thought about that and I was thinking maybe it's not about quote unquote stock elements in a story that can be off-putting in SNS. Maybe it's more like when those feel like kind of gamified. Sometimes when you read a story and the fantastic elements feel like, oh, this person's translating video games, or maybe big budget CGI movies. Or otherwise when like the author is not really taking their time to develop them because they're like, yeah, skeletons, you get it, Whereas in this, I felt like without, again, drowning us in description, I thought Sarah took the time to make each element really feel lived in, interesting, and developed and thought upon, even if we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg behind. Like, I don't feel like we got the whole story about the spider. We got enough to enjoy the story. But yeah, I just I find that kind of interesting, at least for me. I don't know. How do y'all feel? Because I know everybody shares the same feelings as me about quote unquote like standardized fantasy. But how did you feel about the fact that, like, it's a straightforward adventure story? It's the Lester Dent story structure, which, folks, if you don't know what that is, Google it. It's a fascinating thing to do and try. But yeah, I mean, maybe starting with you, Matt. Like, how did you feel about the fact that like the elements are quote unquote stock, but like they're presented with love and care?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I'm someone who's okay with cliche and convention because it's always about like execution is more important than anything else, really. Like, it doesn't matter what the elements are. And so I think, yeah, you got this creepy bog, you got creepy spider queen. But I think if you execute it well, then it won't matter whether or not it's stock. I mean, I like cliche. I like the symbols because they're familiar, and it gives you, like, in the language of like criticism, it gives you a variety of affordances that you can like actually tap into because they're these sort of almost like archaic something. And so I like symbols. I like bogs. I like creepy swamps. But yeah, I think if you just do it well, we like that because we like to recognize stuff. Like humans, we're like pattern-seeking creatures, right? That's what we notice, we see things that and if we can attach a pattern to it and recognize it, it sticks with us. So there's a reason that stuff sort of sticks around. So yeah, I don't have a problem with it. I finally started playing like Baldur's Gate 3, and which is in like the most capital G generic fantasy trademark place world or whatever. But like, it doesn't matter because like they just know how to tell a really good story, and it's so interesting. Like, it doesn't, it could be the most stock in the most stock world imaginable, but it's okay. So yeah, the bog is interesting. She's got one paragraph where she goes out of her way, or Century does, to sort of talk about all the life that's in the bog.
The ecosystem,
as an ecosystem. And again, from that first paragraph, I think she does do a good job of, in only a few lines, like this is I don't know, the first page, I guess, so page 43. But far below her, the great bog gurgled like a hungry belly. I mean, that's all you need. And you sort of, I mean, she does more, but like, there's your scene. And again, we recognize it. It taps into that sort of, but yeah, it's all just execution stuff. So yeah, I have no problem with, but I do understand what you're saying. There's a difference between like a first draft attempt at doing something stock and then like a revision where you've actually thought about it and like what is, what's sort of interesting about these ideas in the first place. Why do we keep coming back to them?
Yeah, like I guess it's a shallowness that I object to, not the specific like monster or whatever, right?
Yeah.
It just all too often, like I say, and I'm sorry, I do try to focus on like the positives of the fiction when we do these things, but just all too often you do kind of the stuff that, just like I say, it feels like I'm not seeing a monster or a story. Like I'm not seeing a well-developed story element. I'm seeing a signifier, and I'm getting this sensation of just like, yeah, come on, you know what this is, and like let's hurry up to the good bit. And it's like, don't hurry me up. Like every part of the story should be good. Don't just be like, yeah, skeletons, yeah, orcs or whatever. I guess that's what I object to. And it was just nice to have the story kind of make me pause while I'm thinking about, what do I want as an editor? What do I like as a person who reads this stuff? And be like, yeah, you know what? That spider, hook me up. I don't know. How did you feel about that, Jay? Do you have any thoughts while
Well,
you're going through?
so this was a great exercise, especially since you mentioned it in the context of editing. One of the notes that I give, I would say probably like the most often, is I need one crisp detail, not 3 generic statements.
Yes.
I need one visual element here. And a lot of times that's like in the service of like cutting significant amounts of word count. But like in terms of like, for example, we were just talking about, and I actually just pulled up the bit about the bog, because that one paragraph that you land on with the description of what's living in the bog, there's one sentence that I just thought was absolutely spot on. And that is, each nameless corpse contributed to a thriving ecosystem. Can you not get a whole world of imagery out of one sentence there? That's incredible. It's so well done. And that the rest of that paragraph serves that sentence. There's nothing in that paragraph that doesn't belong there. And I think that is the efficiency of this story. It really gets you in and it gets you out as swiftly as possible, but not without a great amount of visual. And that's awesome. Like, I think that's a great skill, and a lot of writers shy away from it. And that's likely because we're very accustomed to bloat in fantasy, and we're very okay with it usually. Like there's a certain amount of like what I would call like Chihuahua Killer Doorstopper stuff that a lot of generic fantasy does, and I think that that's a lot of what you kind of balk at.
Yeah.
And to be fair, like I balk at a fair amount of it myself. But I think that part of what we tend to be reacting to is the lack of specificity, because that lack of specificity serves epic fantasy, but it doesn't really serve something that's tight and bodily like Sword and Sorcery. The tight bodily nature that we're looking for, the really like the intense physical presence of the character in the scene, is something that is not always it's not valued in certain other sections. And that's not to say that it's like it's all important in all of fantasy. It's just sort of like, what's your mode? And that's one of the ways that we know that this mode is Sword and Sorcery.
Yeah, if we're going to be having a tighter focus close up, we don't want to be seeing smooth, unrendered polygons or whatever.
Right, exactly. Yeah. We don't need to see the distance. We need to see what she's standing in, and that she's standing in is this bog.
Yeah, and actually it's funny, you say that we don't need to see the distance, because this whole time in my head I'm imagining something like at most a medium shot of something out of like Labyrinth or whatever, you know what I mean? Like,
exactly. It is.
Yeah, we don't have the horizon at any point in the story.
No, there's no distance here until you get to the end, and that's how you know it's the end.
Yes, and I can't wait to discuss the end. But before we do, Kevin, how did you feel about like the sort of what we're discussing here, this level of granular detail, the stock quote unquote elements that are nonetheless like well executed, efficiency, right? It's not just economy, it's efficiency, there's skill. Yes.
Yeah, it's like a few pages, but I was struck like, everything is there perfectly measured. That's what I was really impressed with. Like take it we'll probably talk about the weird elements, but as you were saying, in terms of like codified, easy generic elements, it's done in an interesting way that, like, at the beginning, she's being confronted by those 3 blonde women in like silver armor. And there's bits that, looking back, you can sort of figure out in your head what it connects to, but she doesn't spell it out. It doesn't come off as like, yes, each of her represents a pair of arms and a pair of eyes, of the main villainess. It's just, it's what my head came up with afterwards. But it's just enough of a disjointed thing that stimulates the mind instead of just being fed it. This is what it is.
Yeah, I remember maybe I don't think it's me having read the story looking back and being like, oh yeah, I was smarter on my first read than I actually was. But like even just that very beginning, the 3 women felt kind of dreamy, and it's not that I knew that they were an illusion. but just the contrast between their sparkly, armor and gossamer hair, yada yada, and then meanwhile Vi's like covered in dirt and half stripped, and all the bog crap beneath her and everything. Like, I don't know, I felt like that was a nice way of just very faintly setting up the fact that like these women aren't real. They couldn't be that clean in this setting. Like we're gonna
Right.
find out later, they're an illusion.
And this is that efficiency thing again, because
Yep.
it's in such a short span of time that we get that information.
And I really, really admire that ability in an author. I'm always very excited when I read something that is very efficient. Which I say it sounds like a weirdly. I feel like I'm just Sarah. If you end up watching this, I'm sorry, or listening to this, I worry I'm sounding like I'm coming out with the backhanded compliment brigade here. I'm like it's very efficient and the stock characters were good, but it's like like I said, but efficiency to me signifies ability, not just like economy. Like
Oh,
I
yeah.
said.
Oh yeah, no, that's
And
100% a compliment.
yeah,
I'm never going to say like, oh, this story was efficient, like derogatory.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
this
Like
story was
yeah, like-
efficient, and therefore I could print it because it was 4,000 words instead of 6,000 words. That kind of thing.
Yeah, like it's a fundamental of what makes me love sword and sorcery is when the story is not just short but efficient and skilled and gets in everything in short order and is satisfying. Kevin, sorry, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just because it's interesting because like Howard Andrew Jones has brought this up several times when he's interviewed about his most recent books, but how much Richard Stark's Parker crime novels are a huge influence on him. And if anybody has not read them, the main, Richard Stark, pseudonym for Donald Westlake, runs a clinic on how tight and terse and efficient prose is. Like all these crime books are slim, but they are packed with like plot and character detail, but just bears enough to tell you exactly what you need to know and not an iota more, but just enough that everything's there.
A masterclass in opening sentences or short paragraphs too. I forget which volume it was because there were a bunch of Parker books, but the one where it's just like, the phone was ringing as he was busy killing the man in the garage or whatever, like just stuff like that. Like, or gosh, of course I don't have any off the top of my head, but yeah, I would say it's good to start with the first one, The Hunt, and then after that, read them in any old order. They're great to study and of course enjoy. And inspired a lot of films, but we're not here to talk about Lee Marvin. As much as I would.
This is one thing I really admired about Sarah's story is that it comes off as almost like sparse in terms of the story, but I just felt like by the end that there was so much going on, and she was just giving us enough for us to figure out without spelling it out. She did not take us for idiots, and I really appreciate that. Felt like she was secure in what the story was and told us exactly what it was, and didn't feel the need to second guess herself or anything.
Yeah.
Well,
And
that's
actually,
a really
before
good way to put it, I think.
Yeah, before we move on a little farther, we're going to take from the chat here. Philip Rogers points out, he says, The Frost Giant's Daughter is my favorite Conan story because Howard painted such a vivid picture of what was going on in just a couple of paragraphs. The story is only 10 pages long. And yeah, there you go. I think it might be the shortest official Conan story.
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah.
This is all Hemingway's fault, which is like a very sort of teachery like explanation, but like there's a direct line. You had like Hemingway and Faulkner in American prose kind of went one direction, and it wasn't Faulkner. and I think it has bearing here because Hemingway was influenced by like the Imagist movement, which was all about like, how do I like excise something till it's so like crystalline in its structure that it like produces this profound image in its few amount of words. And so he worked with people like Ezra Pound, who like Pound would take his stories and just like cut, and then until you get like the Hemingway story, which is so, and like there's a direct line from like him to someone like Howard, but also Raymond Carver and even up to now. But it all has to do with like the potency of like the image. And there are a lot of just really good like sort of punchy sentences in here that do a lot and have like really sort of crunchy verbs and like adjectives that you just, it's so clear.
Well, good point, man. Yeah, before I move on to the next discussion point I wanted to bring up, why not, again, for those listening who have not read the story, the first, let's say 3 sentences, the first short paragraph. I'm just going to quickly read that out. So the story begins. The blade against Vi's ribs slipped and broke skin, sprouting a thin stream of blood. Far below her, the grey bog gurgled like a hungry belly. The 3 silver-clad women, Vi's would-be captors, held their knives out at her. Beneath the drop-off, the bodies of lost travelers jutted out at odd angles, each at a different stage of decomposition. Even from high above, the stench was dizzying. Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty strong for all the reasons we've been discussing. I also really like, one of my sort of like do a shot if you're being edited by me and I say this. The phrase order of information is something I'm very big on. And I like how the order of information that we're given here, tight focus on our hero and they're in trouble, they're spouting blood, they got a knife against them, and then we just slowly zoom out, but also kind of like move, see the scene and kind of move down, and then we get snapped back up again for even from high above. Right, because it's back up into the scene after we've sort of fallen, panned down after pulling out to see the dead bodies, et cetera, et cetera. And yet it doesn't read, quote unquote, like filmic, like a screenplay. It reads like prose. But yeah, it guides the eye through the story, I thought, very well via the order of information. So, as I say, this anthology, Profane Altars, has the subtitle Weird Sword and Sorcery. And the weird with a capital W is an oft-discussed thing that is kind of hard to ever pin down entirely, pretty much by design, because the point is that it's not easily, codified, and that's why we love it, folks. Yeah, I felt this story nailed the weird element, and I know a couple of you told me you felt the same way. I'm going to go back around the counterclockwise here just to mix it up. Kevin, I think you said to me in chat earlier that you felt like, yeah, they got the weird going on here. How do you feel that was achieved, and what does it mean to you?
For me, it's the fact that there's a little bit of dream logic going on, not so much in terms of the actual story, but in terms of when she finally discovers what she's like, thinks she's seeking. The spoiler, the Spider Queen. It's very much like, yeah, you can sort of see how we went from like 3 women with like silver armor hunting her to them taking her to Spider Gate, and it being like this beautiful sorceress who then becomes like, the spider. It feels very stream of consciousness, or like something that would happen in a dream, but in a way that just makes it that there's just enough that you keep thinking there's something, there, but not in a way that you expect. There is no like logical consequence, like chain of consequences going on here. It's just one thing after another, but not in a way that felt like self-consciously like, hey, I'm gonna do a swerve here. It just felt like very subconscious, and that to me, I guess, is, if I had to point towards the weird, it's very much the idea that's working on a subconscious level as opposed to being consciously weird.
I like that, and not just because, as you were describing this, you made me think of what if David Lynch but SNS? Like I'd buy that for $1. But anyway, yeah. No, I agree with you. I felt through the whole story definitely a dreaminess to it. Like I say, right from the opening with the discordancy of the women, looking all shiny as opposed to everything else we're seeing. And I thought something else that was great was the character was disoriented and struggling for most of the story, but I wasn't. I find sometimes stories do a little too good a job of making me feel rough, bored, strained, or whatever as the character is. But yeah, okay, all right, man. Jay, you were nodding your head when I was saying I felt the story hit the weird bullseye.
Yes.
So I'm guessing you feel it did too. What does that mean to you, and how do you feel that Sarah nailed
I
it?
think the thing that I liked about the weird elements is that they don't all tie together uniformly. None of them ties off in a neat bow. They all sort of explain each other, but only as far as you can go, like, okay, this vision to this vision to this vision are all related. But the specific elements of them are never really explained beyond a certain point. You never really feel like, oh, it's definitely because of this element to this element. And you never really feel like you don't feel a strong sense of like, oh, I solved the mystery. The mystery is still there. The mystery is still present. And that's the thing that I liked the most. The mystery includes, as we were discussing before, also the rabbit. And that was one of the things that I really thought, again, like I was expecting something to happen there. And the fact that it was very, very ordinary in a lot of ways made it weird in its own way.
Yeah,
So
it
I
was
feel
just a
like that
rabbit that gave her something to hold on to. Yeah.
sometimes a rabbit is just a rabbit, and that was fascinating. I thought that was really, like, again, I've talked about it a lot already on this, but I feel like that was an element that I really liked. But yeah, the fact that nothing felt buttoned up, and that was really important to me as a person trying to find the weird specifically in a story like this. I think it was skillfully done.
Yeah, like I'm thinking, okay, we can put together roughly there's some kind of anglerfish situation going on with
Right.
the giant spider and the three women projection, but it's not like the three women. I think a lesser storyteller, would have made the three women have something faintly spiderish about them,
Right. Or
just
like,
ever
or
so
there would be some kind
faintly.
of rules of engagement with them, like
Yeah,
that they
yeah,
are like a D&D monster, and they're not. The
yeah,
rules of
and then there you
engagement
go,
are
right?
very
That's
much dreamlike, and dreamlike means that they really reject rules, kind of.
yeah. There's
So
no sense of rock paper scissors for how to like navigate any of these
right.
threats. Yeah. How about you, Matt? How did you feel about the capital W weird of it all?
I think like for me, the weird is like the feeling of like the uncanny or like the inexplicable, like a strangeness. It's not necessarily like something material, like big squid monsters or something, which are also cool. But so that's why I think like to me, like I agree with Jay. To me, the weirdest element of the story was the rabbit because it was uncanny and sort of felt so out of place. Because for the rest of the story, like I think the elements would fit well within like you know standard generic fantasy. I wouldn't necessarily think of them in like a weird fiction story. I'm thinking of something like Jeff Vandermeer's work or whatever, which I associate with like contemporary weird, and like he would never have like a big spider monster in a creepy bog, that's too like sort of again like stock, like we've talked about. But he would have a weird bunny, and he does have a lot of weird bunnies in his stories that have some weird inexplicable purpose. He's big into them, and foxes, right? So anyway,
Yeah.
but just like these
There's
weird,
definitely a non-zero amount of foxes in the Annihilation.
yes,
there.
yeah.
Yeah.
But weird animals that seem to like have a kind of preternatural consciousness about them. Like the bunny obviously seems like the bunny's like what saves her from the spider, more or less. So I don't know.
Mostly at no point does it turn to her and go, "I know things. Let me share them with you."
Yeah,
I think that would have been like, nope.
Yeah.
yeah.
Fourth
It
wall-
comes
fourth
really
wall
Some
remains
cool.
lesser
untrammeled.
stories.
Yeah,
In a lesser story, there would be a puff of smoke, and then there would be like an old sorcerer who's like, "I am here finally to confront you," and Spider Queen going,
yeah.
"You," and all that stuff. No,
So
I
that for me is the weird part was the bunny. Honestly, like again, the bog, the weird. A lot of it felt, like this feels like something out of the Witcher game, like a Witcher game or Lord of the Rings, right? Like I was seeing a lot of that imagery in my head. But the bunny was the weird part.
I agree that that's definitely a big part of it. I mean, for me, a big element of what makes me go, the weird, when I'm reading through stories is a sense of being surprised. And I don't just mean like jump scares, obviously, something else altogether, but just this sense of like, yeah, like we're going through this real landscape. Everything's a bit strange and terrible and awful. And then, I don't know what Sarah's intentions were. I won't pretend, but in my imagination, I could see her being like, yeah, they're all going to think this rabbit is something else. Guess what? It's a fucking rabbit. And in a world where everything else is weird, the rabbit is weird.
Yes.
By merit of not being weird, if you know what I mean. Yeah. I think it was definitely, yeah, the rabbit was part of it. The unresolvedness, Jay, that you mentioned. Like I like the fact that we know just enough to follow, but not so much to demystify. I felt like the whole time it's like I don't want to know everything. I don't actually want to be standing on like firm ground, so to speak,
Right.
when I read these kinds of stories. I also don't want to be like, oh, it's so weird, man. Like I can't follow the damn narrative. So it's almost like my ideal place where I feel like weird sits for me is to be like almost dog paddling in quicksand, which in life I don't want to be there. But when I'm reading these things, yeah, I want to feel like I got to work to stay afloat. But I can never fully support myself, and that's how I felt with this. It's like I could, I got to work to follow the narrative and see, okay, that's connects to that, I guess. but at no point am I ever going to have firm footing, and that's kind of like a pleasure. It makes me work, but I'm not going to die.
You don't want to
I
feel
know where I am.
comfortable or complacent.
Yeah, exactly. And brings me to we're about 40 minutes in here, so it's not a bad time to talk about the ending. Now, Kevin, I found it kind of fun that you were bringing up films from sort of 60s and 70s, because if there's one thing I always think of, particularly in the context of the original Suspiria, but other movies, of course, from there as well, is when those stories end. Jesus, they're done. Spoiler for half a century old movie, but the original Suspiria, like, she finds out the ballet school's a bunch of witches, burns a bunch of stuff, runs out the door, boom, credits. Like, yeah, and I think a movie just like a little later in the 80s would have spent at least 5 minutes on showing her like escaping Switzerland or something. And just that final shot of her just going back, running off, and then boom, film directed by, etc. That came to mind with the sorry.
Yeah, like if I could define my definition of horror in terms of, as opposed to say like more standard fantasy or anything, is very much the idea that at the end of a horror story, there are no winners, only survivors. And this, I'm not going to say this is out and out horror story, but I think one reason why it does have a big kick to it is it's kind of weird and unsettling, and it kind of goes into some interesting territory thematically. But the fact that at the end it just ends with her and a rabbit, they got the hell out.
Yeah, it doesn't work out. It's a if you were looking at this like a video game, or like you had very strict ideas about what fantasy fiction should do, I could see you being like, oh well, she failed. It's a failure state at the end or whatever, right? The character, not the author. And I could see how a lot of people might find that unsatisfactory, but I loved it. And it's very true to the genre, going back to its roots. I'm going to bargain the title slightly, but it's like that Clark Ashton Smith one of the more well-known ones, something Satara Zeros, about the thief, and it opens with him telling you, well, Ulysses, I only have one arm. Let me tell you how that happened. And it's all about essentially a classic like pair of thieves breaking into an ancient temple to find the stuff. Oh no, a monster, whatever. But then they encounter something beyond their ken. He loses his arm, and that's it. The story is not a tale of success and riches or whatever. Even our boys, Fafnir and Grey Mouser, like, oftentimes when they lose, they still kind of win at first, and then they lose all the money afterward or whatever, right? They still kind of get a victory before it gets snatched out from under them, or their foolishness costs them their riches. I really enjoyed here that we have this clearly established goal. We have its importance established again all very easily. We get like one short paragraph basically near the start of like, why is Vi here? What was she after? Why is she doing this? Okay, got it. Good. Let's keep going. It just doesn't friggin' work out. And it's not, and it's like, maybe she could have persevered, but she's like, yep, nope. Just like, I've hit my limit. The big spider probably would have eaten me if I hadn't gotten lucky. Better get out of here with my rabbit while I can. I'll figure out how to deal with the king and my exile later, which also perhaps could be a classic SNS thing in the sense of leaving it open to more stories. I have no idea of Sarah's plans for that, but I'd read them. So yeah, I'll go back around the other way this time. Matt, how did you feel about that suddenness of the ending? How did you vibe with that?
I do think the ending did feel sudden. I'm not sure exactly if I sort of was satisfied by it or felt like it sort of did what it needed to, whatever that might have been. Because yeah, it feels there's all this build up, and then she's running away, and it says they're running for like days. Like, this is a big bog, but she's running with the bunny. And I don't know, it was a bit too cutesy for me, her like naming the bunny Jewel. Like, I was like, I don't know what's happening right now. I feel like it slipped into a Pixar movie or something. It's like Frozen Part 3. But I don't know. I wasn't the biggest fan of the ending. It definitely felt like, it felt like a lot of, I guess, more traditional SNS tales where it's just like off to another adventure. I don't, lessons learned, who knows, but you've got this bunny companion now. That was
character growth. We figured it out. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, character growth. But again, I would ask, like, where does she start and where does she end? It feels the same to me. There is a line where this is right at the end. I guess it's the last sentence. Part of her burned at the thought of going back to the, and not having what she wanted. But nothing, no quest, no king, and no hidden longing for what might have been. Nothing could force her to return to the swamp of the spider god and her hungry, roaming children. So, and again, you don't need to have some sort of arc / growth in every story. Like you don't need that, I don't think. But I don't know if it didn't quite land for me, I guess, the ending.
No, that's fair. I mean, I kind of liked. I realized I didn't actually explain why. In one sentence more for me, and I'll move on to you, Jay. Sorry, why the failure state thing really gives me a chuckle, and it's because, well, it's funny, but also sometimes, but also, it makes SNS feel more ripe with possibility if we can enjoy an SNS story where the hero just like bungles it or flees in fear and understandable, wanting to just survive. Like, screw this noise, I'll figure something else out. I like that. I like being able to read these things. Oh, sorry, comment from the chat from ImpSimp. Great name. I love the magazine. Please keep doing what you're doing. Thank you very much. We absolutely will. But that will include these chats, I hope. So yeah. So I think that's also the thing of the failure state and the suddenness. It surprised me, and also the failure allows for more possibility, which is always something I'm in favor of. Anyway, Matt, you're bad and you should feel bad. No, I'm kidding.
No, I guess maybe if more of that sort of like whimsy, carefree attitude had been threaded throughout the story, like something more like Liber or something, where it is. But this story felt really like heavy to me for the most part. And so that's why, again, the bunny feels so strange. And, that could have all been part of the intent. And then, like, my reaction is just part of what Century wanted to go for.
Fair. But yeah, okay. So, Jay, how did you feel about the ending?
Okay. I think I largely liked the ending. I do feel like it does feel really sudden. I do feel like the story, again, as we've discussed throughout, it gets in and it gets out, and there is no room spared for anything. And I would agree there that like it could have been slightly more Liber-esque if it were a little bit like I think that there is humor threaded throughout, but it's a little bit less. It is not benchmarked. It is not clearly labeled, and so like some of her interiority is funny if you kind of like know to look for it. But I did not see it in the first pass through the story at all. So that was definitely like something I think that could possibly have been drawn out a little bit more. One of the things that, of course, Oliver and I have said countless times in the past 2 months because of beating hearts and battle axes, one of the victory conditions of Sword and Sorcery is specifically the idea that the story continues on. That's really like my idea of a happily ever after, so to speak, in Sword and Sorcery. I also think it's the thing that distinguishes Sword and Sorcery and heroic fantasy is that failure as an alternate victory condition is very much in play in Sword and Sorcery in a way that I don't think that it is as readily in heroic fantasy.
Yeah, definitely not as much. I think in heroic fantasy, well, if that does happen, then of course it
like
tragedy,
in heroic fantasy, it's a tragedy. Like Elric is a grand tragedy. Most of the Eternal Champion is a grand tragedy.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the first volume in particular. Yeah.
But in general, that's still the like the elements of Sword and Sorcery are still present there. But the tragedy is epic scaled in a way. But so for this, I think that this is one of those where it's like the failure mode is an acceptable way to end a Sword and Sorcery tale. And so like it feels very similar to me, being that we have already invoked Liber. Like it does definitely have the like, all right, guys, we got to get on a boat. That happens in roughly half of the
yeah, we got to get out of town. There's a lot of people mad at us right now.
Out of town. The only way is by boat.
That's
a fantastic question.
Yeah, okay. You know what, Kevin, sir, hold your thought. We'll come back to you. No, actually, yeah, no, we'll do the question quickly first. Can Sword and Sorcery exist? Sorry, ImSimp again. Can Sword and Sorcery exist as a multi-book novel series, or is it confined to short stories and novellas? Well, I think it absolutely can exist as a multi-book novel series because it does. In the Eternal Champion series, for example, it varies between SNS and heroic fantasy, true, but yeah, I mean there are definitely
They're
multi-book
sibling
novel series.
genres.
Yeah, but there are also novels that are short. There are novels that
Yeah.
tend to hover around 120 to 160-ish pages. So
Right.
I think that lends to it. I think you still want something that's like maybe a bit longer than a novella, but definitely not, a Chihuahua killing door witch.
Right.
Just because the pacing, that efficiency we are talking about, is very difficult to sustain over 100, 200,000 words without just getting kind of exhausting. It's been mentioned here before that Howard Andrew Jones has a neat workaround for that with his Handlebar series, where he has big volumes, but they're collections of stories that are essentially like a TV series season, with kind of an arc, but you can enjoy individual episodes, as it were, short stories strung together like pearls, like episodes in a season. So, yeah, there's lots of ways to attack it, but yeah, ultimately, I think it can be done. It's just not the most common form of the thing. Anyway, so coming back to the ending of Sara Century's story, Kevin, how did you feel about it?
It's gonna be the bit where I kind of get into my own personal reading of the story.
Mm,
What really struck me about V, the character, is she is kind of in, like, she keeps telling herself, I'm doing this, I can get back with the woman I love. I keep doing this, get back with the woman I love. And she's been doing multiple missions for King Atticus. And it always seems like it keeps being withdrawn from her. And by going with that, or combining that with this aura of gloom, it very much feels like thematically, this is a character who's going through a really bad mental state at that time. That the swamp is sucking her in. She is. I mean, it's even her going downward off the cliff, like just going further and further downward. And this might sound cheesy, but I think the reason why the bunny sticks out is the fact that suddenly having responsibility for something a lot more immediate than some pie in the sky, well, maybe one day I'll get back together with this person,
mm,
that would eventually lures her out. And, I don't want to make it be a didactic, oh, this story is about depression, but very much this is something that really struck close to me, is that on one hand, it's really weird and unsettling. On the other hand, I get, how like looking after a small animal can start getting you out of like a really bad mental state.
Oh, that's really
yeah,
smart. I think that that's a really good reading of that.
yeah, damn, bro.
I
Like
actually really
I
love that.
yeah, no, me too. Especially like I know multiple people, including my partner at one point in her life, who got like a cat or something just because, they had to take care of that animal, even if they couldn't take care of themselves. By taking care of that animal, they had to take care of themselves to a certain amount. Yeah, no, that's really cool, man. Good catch. Um, Okay, so I think we've covered the meat and potatoes and the rabbit of this story. I'm just going to throw out two small little miscellaneous bits and then go around the table for you guys to throw in anything that we didn't cover that you want to mention. One is that I've just got two small bits here. First is on the very first page. It just does something that I never get tired of, which is Vi's very first line actually is I'm just passing through. She lied. I don't know. I just love it. I just love when you have a line of dialogue that's an answer to a question, and it's like they lied, and it's just again, yeah, it's just a fun little sleight of hand. I love it. The other thing was I got a little reminder in the story that likable doesn't have to mean lovable. It means kind of relatable, really. So yeah, what was that reminder? Well, over on page 48, when we're getting a bit into that struggle through the swamp and the bog and the whatnot, there's this part that I liked. It reads as follows. In her battered state, it might have been hours or days that it took to reach the spot she jumped from. More than once, the earth simply collapsed out from under her, sending her sliding perilously back toward the waiting arms of the dead. No longer caring about survival, her goal became only to fight the eroding hill so ferociously that it and the rest of this damned swamp would always remember her. I can relate to spite and as a motivator to get through hard times. And something about that here, yeah, I dug it. And also, I think there's a little bit of that sort of lighter tone that we encounter at the end there with naming the rabbit jewel, maybe being threaded in. So yeah, those are my little two miscellaneous bits and pieces. Matt, was there anything at all that didn't fit in with the rest of our discussion you wanted to highlight?
I don't think so. I did like the scene with the Spider Queen herself. I liked sort of the horror elements with the little baby spiders, like always super super creepy. There were some good descriptions, like cloudy pools of venom and their gauzy prison, like we were talking about earlier, like just the sort of the diction choices that sort of throw into relief something really vividly. But yeah, I think that's a bit that's really the only thing that I would have to add. I like that the encounter with the queen, Spider
Fair
Queen.
enough. How about you, Jay? Any miscellaneous for you to toss out?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely wanted to call out. I really liked the way that the action was handled in, especially the scenes where you're very aware that what she's fighting against isn't real. I feel like that was handled very skillfully. That your perception of what she's going through is sort of over her shoulder, and you're not so embedded in her perspective that you can't like understand how unreal this is. I feel like that was done really, really well.
And how about you, Kevin? Any final thoughts?
I guess not bad, but by the end of it, like especially with her naming the rabbit Jewel, and of course the idea that she was sent in the swamp to get a jewel. For whatever reason, after I read that story, I had an image in my head of like Leonard Nimoy from The Simpsons doing well as King Atticus, going, "Well, my work here is done," and like a Jessica, going, "But you didn't do anything, haven't I?" It's just because, yeah, the symbolism might be a little bit unknown, but the very fact that the rabbit was named Jewel was very much the thing. But overall, I just really like the atmosphere she came up with, and yeah, just the preciseness of the ending of just stopping. Yeah, she survived the swamp. I'd like to see more adventures if she's interested.
Yeah, and honestly, yeah, hands down, I'm thinking about beginning and end, right? The story, I mean, many others have said it, but I always think of Kurt Vonnegut when I think of that, solid writing advice. Get in as late as you can, get out as early as you can. Sarah nailed that, if nothing else, but she nailed plenty else, which is part of why I want us to discuss the story. I'm so glad the three of you joined me. We've just about nailed the 1 hour mark. Perfecto. So I'll remind anybody listening or watching this video that you can find the story in Profane Altars, Weird Sword and Sorcery from Weird Punk Books, available in paperback and digital formats. You can find it on Amazon or Weird Punk's website, which is probably better for the publisher if I know how these things tend to work. Buying direct is usually the best thing to do. But I strongly recommend it, not only for Sarah's story, but for many others inside here, which, I mean, I'm not going to name any others because it'll sound like I'm playing favorites. But trust me when I say they're worth checking out. There are many other talented authors in the anthology. Plus, it's 120 pages. Like, if you're thinking, oh no, my TBR pile's too tall, come on. It's 120 pages. Put it on. A bunch of short stories. You can do it. All right. Oliver Brackenbury, book recommender and bully. So yes, thanks again, Kevin, Jay, Matt. I really appreciate you joining me for this discussion, as you have with many previous ones. And hopefully it will be less than 3 months before we do this again. In fact, we'll see what happens. Everything's still very in the sort of timey-wimey, soupy-woopy, whatever. What's happening to my diction, Oliver? Go have a nap. Everything's still kind of messy, but I feel that there is a strong chance, given that I'm the one who decides these things, that we will have another story chat, certainly in September, certainly, or maybe or early October, as part of our next crowdfund, where for reasons we will discuss 2 stories by 2 authors, and that's all I'm going to say. Some of you know exactly what I'm on about, but I'll leave it vague as a teaser for folk. If you want to hear more of these chats, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow us on Blue Sky, Facebook, Twitter if you're still there, and so on and so forth, Instagram, and you'll be alerted whenever our next story chat is, as well as be informed about all other kinds of cool things to do with New Edge Sword and Sorcery magazine. All right, thanks again for those of you who joined us in the chat and anybody checking this out after the fact. Thank you and good night. Good night. Everybody else is waving.